Hello everyone, welcome back to another Construkt plugin video and sorry about that. Before we get started, there was a couple of things I added in the last episode that I actually forgot to cover. The first thing is permissions. I added a whole heap of permissions to be configured on the server. This ranges from the functionality to the shapes the player can use. Here's an example of being excluded from the sphere shape. Permissions are a very simple if check in Bukkit that I added to the commands and different functions in Construkt. Basic stuff. I also added some range and volume limitations that can be disabled with a permission. These can be set in the new default config file generated when the plugin starts up. The default range is 3 chunks and the default volume is 2 chunks cubed. Here I'm demonstrating the default range limit. Placing or breaking a block beyond this limit cancels the event and tells you what's wrong. And here's the volume limitation. It's all very simple. All it does is just calculate the size of the area and its volume. It's the stuff I already coded for the generation side of the plugin. The complicated part was actually the config generation and usage. But I did get it all worked out in the end. What I'm adding in this episode is something to modify the existing shapes and make them generate differently, without the need to create another shape. I first created the base files needed and called them filters. They are similar to the shape classes I created earlier. The difference between this and a shape is that they can only return a boolean value based on the current loop iteration. If it returns true, the block is allowed to be placed. As a test, I created a checkered pattern filter, so every non-adjacent block is placed. To apply a filter is a command similar to setting a shape. Everything is just prefixed with the word filter though. Once I had all the new functionality in place, I hopped into Minecraft to try it out. The first test worked! Well, it did generally. Setting a filter worked perfectly, easy to add and remove. However, the checkered filter only partially worked, mainly due to me not entirely understanding how to actually generate the pattern. The X and Z axes worked fine, but the Y axis wasn't actually changing. I ended up making multiple changes to the code that were as simple as this to try and get it to work. But it did take me a couple of tries to figure it out. I eventually got it to work in the way I wanted. The advantage of filters is that they work on all existing shapes, like overlays. And here's a weird looking sphere I generated with the checkered filter. Now a single filter is cool and all, but I wanted filters to be stackable so you can apply more than one. So I worked on a different storage method and a way for the player to apply multiple filters. And while I was at it, I also added a way to set the parameter on these filters like you can with shapes. For the checkered pattern, I added an invert parameter to change the checkered offset. Filters use the same classes as the shapes use, the shape parameter classes. Now that I think about it, I should probably get around to changing their name. After a mess of reconfiguring existing parameter functions to work with filters, I worked on implementing the commands to change the filter parameters and add, remove, and clear all the filters. And finally, I set up the calls to check all active filters if a block can be changed. Currently, all active filters have to return true for the block to be changed. The commands worked fine during testing, but the auto-completion was wrong. It was easy enough to fix up though. As for parameters, they worked well. Up until I tried to invert the checkered pattern, I broke the y-axis again. I really don't understand the whole checkered filter I made. Look at that. It's ugh. Anyway, after a couple fixes I got it working again. It kinda made sense what was wrong, but even now I'm not 100% sure if I completely understand what I've written. It's probably all wrong. Oh well. Now that I've added a way to use multiple filters at once, why not add another filter? This one's called Slice. It basically cuts the generated area along the axis and a specified percentage, and it can also be inverted. First tests were looking good. Commands look good. Placement worked fine. Breaking did just normal breaking though. The filter didn't appear to affect it at all. It confused me for a bit, but it turned out it wasn't even the filter's problem. While setting up some of the code for the other shapes, I broke something along the way. Turned out I wasn't actually checking properly if it could change the block during a block break event and just did every block. Once I fixed it, it was all good again. Slice worked perfectly. And to test multiple filters, I applied both the checkered filter and the slice filter. And as you can see, it works without issue. The next filter I wanted to add was a random filter. Not like a random idea, but a filter that places blocks randomly. There's a parameter that lets you set the chance for the block to be placed. And that was simple enough to add. It was simple enough to test too. Worked as expected. Using the random filter with overlays helps make the terrain shape look beautiful too. You can add trees, grass, and flowers. Doesn't that look great? And now for yet another filter. It uses the same value that terrain uses to generate, but with a 3-dimensional axis. It's hard to explain, but basically generates cave-like structures while using the cuboid shape. Here's an example. It uses similar parameters to the terrain shape, but has a couple extras. The first one is the limit, and it works similar sense to the random filter. It uses a value of 1 to 99 to basically signify density. The other one is invert, which just inverts. Yeah. Anyway, applying this noise to the terrain can make the terrain more interesting. It also takes a long time to generate large areas currently. I know exactly why, and it's something I'll have to optimize in the future. So adding this noise filter generates these overhangs and caves and makes it more Minecrafty looking. Using both noise and random, you can make patchy looking grass all over the top so it isn't just everywhere. And to bring us to the end of the video, I've added an extra parameter to the checkered shape to change its size. It looks pretty cool. Also using some random, you can make some interesting patterns like this. And that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I'll see you all next time.